ultimately the purpose-built rental market in the post-COVID world will look very similar to that of the pre-COVID world, at least in Toronto.
Hello, and welcome to Sink or Swim, a bi-weekly podcast brought to you by RentSync, where we provide an insider's look into the prop tech, multifamily, and rental housing industry. In each episode, we take a deep dive into the technologies and strategies that have helped companies overcome operational challenges and increase the value of their multifamily investments. So, without further delay, let's get into today's discussion.
Welcome back to Sink or Swim. I'm Mitch Fanning from RentSync, formerly LWS. And joining me today is Julian Battiston, the co-founder and CEO of the Oben Group, a Toronto-based real estate company who focuses on upscale, purpose-built developments. Julian, how you doing today?
Doing great, Mitch. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad you decided to do this. I'm excited to talk about really all things purpose-built. But before we kind of get into the conversation, maybe you can give us a quick intro and also specifically talk about how you got started in real estate development and specifically, I guess, the purpose-built rental market.
Sure. Well, I got into real estate development, I would say, somewhat unexpectedly. In fact, I began my career in IT, of all things, right out of school in 2001. Which I'm not sure if you recall, but that was really the height of the dot-com bubble.
Yep.
I started working for a tech startup in Germany. And ironically, not only was the company developing software for the real estate industry, but the startup's co-founder, Mark Brederman, would a decade later become my business partner in Oben Flats.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, life kind of works in funny ways. But anyway, shortly after I arrived in Germany, to start my job, 9/11 happened. And that essentially marked the beginning of the end of the dot-com bubble. And within 8 months, the company closed its doors. I was back in Toronto with no job, not really an idea of what I was going to do next. And then one day out of the blue, I get a call from a family friend who was a home builder. And he asked if I would be interested in a job in the construction industry. And I took it. I figured I had nothing at that point to lose. And I ended up spending the next 8 years there, building both low-rise subdivision housing and high-rise residential developments throughout the GTA. And then in 2010, I decided that I wanted to give it a go on my own. And during this entire period, I had stayed in touch with Mark, although he lived in Germany. He was really no stranger to Canada. His family owned some property here that they acquired back in the 70s. That included some older rental buildings. And while he always wanted to expand the portfolio of rental properties, he lacked the boots on the ground to make that happen. So here I was on my own with some solid construction and development experience under my belt. And we felt that at that point, we had our interests were aligned. We'd make good business partners, and we decided to create Oben Flats together.
So right off the bat, there's a lot to unpack there, and I feel like I'm about to go off script a little bit because as you were speaking, as you were talking, I couldn't help but think you went through the dot-com. You decided to get into real estate development really just after 2008, really the financial crisis. And now it's 2020 and we're kind of going through COVID-19. So you've literally gone through 3 interesting time periods. I guess my first question is, maybe we can elaborate why the shift, why not continue down the tech path? Why the shift into real estate from technology?
Honestly, it wasn't a conscious decision. Look, I was 25 years old at the time, and looking back, it's easy to try to think about what I was thinking back then. But honestly, it was an opportunity that I had always been intrigued by the building and development industry. although I knew very little about it, there was something tangible about real estate development that I liked, and I saw myself in that world. And then once the opportunity presented itself, I went for it. The tech, I think I was, put it this way, I think I was better suited for real estate development than I was technology.
Sure.
It just, at that time, everyone at my age seemed to be going down that path and trying to somehow get into technology. During university, I had a web design company. I was building websites for friends and family. It was just, that was the thing you did back then. But anyhow, I went from there. I took this opportunity to get into real estate and never looked back. And I'm quite thankful I took that risk at that time.
And, as you kind of walk me through that, I'm kind of getting a sense of how you have kind of become known for creating that new segment of purpose-built rentals with really a focus on good design. That being kind of the mid-rise townhome projects that you've been working on. So it's kind of interesting. I also starting to connect the dots on you're really kind of seen as an innovator, in not only design but also how some of these projects are being financed, and maybe that's just again because you've had that outside experience. I guess going back to kind of the questions I had, we kind of started down that answering this, but how did you specifically get the idea for Open Flats?
Right. So at that time, we had recognized, and I'm referring back to 2010, there was this growing number, or we were seeing this growing number of people, especially millennials, turning to the rental market. The problem was the options for these renters were quite limited, particularly in the higher end rental market. We also felt that the property management model was entirely outdated. They hadn't yet adopted the service culture that had been adopted by virtually every other industry. So the vision was to create a rental concept that would be entirely unique to the multifamily sector. This meant developing rental buildings that not only combined contemporary design with a very strong emphasis on customer service, but we thought we wanted to do that through a truly urban lifestyle rental brand. I mean, the idea ultimately was to recreate in our buildings that vibe and atmosphere you'd experience when you walked into one of your favorite boutique hotels. And,
right.
And it was more than just creating that experience through fancy lobbies. We really thought hard about activating those spaces through some really interesting programming. We would regularly host catered events with DJs and bartenders. We curated our own music playlists. We developed a signature scent. These things are a little more common today, but 5 or 6 years ago in the purpose-built rental market, these ideas were quite novel. And it was also clear to us in those early days that if we were really going to fulfill that vision, we had to retain control of the construction and property management functions. We just wouldn't be able to rely on some third party to build it out for us. So we created 2 new divisions, Oben Build and Oben PM, to take care of that. And since then, Oben Group's really evolved into this vertically integrated platform around new purpose-built rental developments. We build them not only for ourselves, but other landowners and institutional groups as well that are looking for that turnkey brand and management solution for their own new rentals.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
So it's interesting because, really, I was going to kind of ask, in your view, why there is such a need for this type of housing. Obviously, you've answered that. I guess kind of a follow-up to that was, what do you feel has changed if anything, now kind of that we're in this kind of post COVID or in this kind of a new normal in your view?
Well, I would say immediately when COVID hit, we incorporated stricter cleaning measures and guidelines into the daily operations of our buildings, which I'm sure we'll maintain. We will maintain indefinitely. But looking and thinking about the longer term impacts of COVID, I would say COVID has really accelerated our timeline for adapting smart technologies in our buildings as a way to keep our residents and our staff safer. For that matter, this was something that we were looking into, pre-COVID. But we've begun to work very closely with groups in the smart building space to help us integrate these smart technologies and building automation systems into one connected building system. Things like voice control, facial recognition, keyless entry, all these technologies currently exist, but it's a very fragmented market at the moment, and no one's really done a good job of combining them into one platform, which is what we're working on. And I think not only will these technologies keep our residents safer, but they'll ultimately improve the quality of life of our residents. And I think we are somewhat fortunate at being quite nimble as an organization. We're able to adopt these technologies and bring them to market much sooner than many of the other rental providers out there that may have 1,000 or tens of thousands of units under their portfolio.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that keeps coming up in these conversations is, in respects to what's changed as a result of COVID, is a lot of times it's doing the things that you probably should have been doing anyways. Just now it's forcing you to do them sooner. So again, kind of going a little bit off script, would you mind just kind of elaborating, because it's really interesting? Would you elaborating a little bit into the smart technology? I know that you mentioned kind of voice control, or without kind of giving away a lot of the secret sauce. Would you kind of elaborate a bit?
Sure. Look, we've always been, or at least we've regarded ourselves to be quite innovative in the space as far as technology goes. Good example. I mean, we started using landlord web solutions, your previous brand, years ago, and we integrated that with some other property management platforms along the way. The smart technology component really is quite new. It's, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of innovative groups out there developing this technology, but they seem to be working in silos. So the challenge has really been putting it all together and making it not only accessible to our residents, but something that will actually be used by our operations staff. And that's really the hurdle, is to come up with a way to implement and adapt these technologies through some platform that everyone within our staff and organization can use quite easily. And from the resident standpoint, it's not only about, of course, our priority is to create these safe environments, but it's also to we look at other things. Smart technologies will help with the environment. When we talk about remote thermostat and climate control within suites, smart lighting, we could program, and residents could program their suites to basically have less of an impact on the environment through some of these technologies. So I think the smart technologies will benefit us, our staff, our residents in many ways, and just creating a safer environment to live.
Yeah, and again, going back to kind of why you initially got into this, a lot of residents, specifically the ones that are, looking, that want to live that urban upscale lifestyle without necessarily seeing the value or wanting to at least buy at this point are going to see value in that for sure. So kind of switching gears a little bit, so you've been in the game for well over 10 years. It's kind of a new world at this point. Is there any advice that you would give maybe any new real estate developers, maybe who are getting, like you were getting in a year or two after the financial crisis? They may be getting into the game, or already they were in the game just early, and any advice that you would give real estate developers or operators going forward?
Yeah, I think I would say don't try to compete on scale. There will always be bigger players than you out there. Instead, find your niche. What's your unique value proposition? What will differentiate your buildings and projects from the rest? And once you've figured out what that is, don't compromise your brand. A good example is that, as you know, we're very passionate about great design and quality. These are some of the defining principles of Oben Flats. However, great design is expensive, and it can be very tempting to reduce costs in our newer projects by scaling back on some of these design elements that we know will make our buildings better and more unique buildings. But again, it's easy to fall into this trap, and you end up diluting not only your brand, but ultimately, I think, the value of your organization. So I would say, stay principled.
It's sage advice. So we've kind of alluded to this a little bit, or we've talked about it. We've touched upon it, but kind of as a follow-up question, in your view, what does the future of the purpose-built rental market look like now in a post-COVID world? Or, where was it going kind of before all this craziness started?
Yeah, well, I think ultimately the purpose-built rental market in the post-COVID world will look very similar to that of the pre-COVID world, at least in Toronto. Of course, in the shorter term, we're not going to see the same lifts in rent on turnover that we're seeing, pre-pandemic. There are a number of supply and demand factors at play today, which are unfortunately putting downward pressure on rent. We're seeing, a lack of immigration. People are leaving the city. There's been the recent flood of Airbnb units to the long-term leasing market. We're going to see some new product coming on stream relatively soon. I mean, I can go on, but eventually this will balance itself out. And I think demand will certainly come back to Toronto. And I think that the groups that can adopt new technologies into their buildings and find really innovative ways to create safer environments for the residents are going to be positioned to do quite well in the long run. So I'm not worried.
No, absolutely. Again, kind of better value prop, obviously find your niche. Those type of things are important anyways. But like I said, there's always ebbs and flows in any type of market. And obviously real estate is no different. So now we kind of move into my favorite part of the conversation, which is usually the quick fire, kind of before we come to a close. So I'll say a statement, and you'll have about 60 to 90 seconds to respond. So Julian, are you ready?
Fire away.
What do you believe that others might disbelieve?
Well, sticking with the COVID theme, I don't believe that working from home will become the new normal when we're out of this mess. Call me old school, but I think it's very short-sighted for some of these large organizations to make such sweeping statements that they don't anticipate their staff ever having to return back to the office because things are working out so well at the moment. We've been in this situation or this predicament for maybe 7 months now. I don't think that's enough time to adequately measure the long-term consequences of a fully remote workforce to an organization's productivity. And more importantly, I just don't think that technology is there yet to truly replace those positive outcomes you get while collaborating with clients and colleagues face to face in the same room. And really creating an environment and culture that fosters creativity and innovation, you just can't do over Zoom. At least I haven't figured that out yet. I'm seeing it within my own organization. Sure, everyone's working hard, they're doing their job, but I feel that there's something missing. So, I mean, we'll have to wait and see. But that's what I believe at the moment.
I literally just had that conversation with my president last night. The same debate, not even debate, but it kind of same conclusion as well. So it's kind of ironic that you brought it up. Next question: as a result of COVID, what have you changed your mind about lately?
This one I probably shouldn't say, but honestly, COVID has forced me to rethink my understanding of basic economics. I used to think, as I was taught in school, that we were all more or less governed by the same set of fundamental economic principles. Clearly, with COVID, that's out the window. We're experiencing this social phenomenon unlike anything we've experienced in our lifetime. Businesses are closing. Unemployment is through the roof. We've got GDP, plummeting. Yet, for some reason, the residential real estate market in Ontario, it's on fire. The stock market is booming. We've got economic forecasts that are bullish. I'm finding it very difficult to reconcile and make sense of this disconnect. And as do most other individuals and business leaders that I speak to today, they generally share the same sentiment. So look, I'm sure it's just a matter of time before we figure this all out. But until then, it's somewhat disconcerting to me.
Yeah, it's that whole concept of the Black Swan, event. There's really no playbook that anyone can, as far as from an economic point of view or an economist point of view, can kind of turn to and say, this is how it'll pan out. So it is definitely quite concerning in that respect. I'm inherently optimistic about things. As you mentioned before, I went through the .com bubble. I went through, the crash in 2008 while working within the real estate industry. And I saw how resilient we were as a people, as economies. We bounced back relatively quickly, and there were opportunities coming out of those situations. And I still, to some extent, agree and think that, there are elements that we're experiencing now that we experienced back then. The main difference, of course, is that those were financial issues and crises. It's a health-related one, and yeah, you said it perfectly. There's no playbook for this one. So but I don't mean to come across as doom and gloom. I do think, if there's any place I would want to be living and working anywhere in this world during this crisis and post-crisis, it would be Toronto. So, we should feel grateful for that. Absolutely. Okay. So last question. This is an easy one. Where can people find or go to find out more about the Oben Group?
Yeah, you can visit us at obengroupinc.com or feel free to email me at jb@obenflats.com. Okay.
Well, that's it for another episode. Julian, thanks so much for doing this, man. It was really a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's it. Until next time, keep swimming.
You've reached the end of another episode of Sink or Swim. Make sure to visit us at rentsync.com/podcast to access show notes, key takeaways, and where you can sign up to our newsletter to receive free bonus content. If you found value in this show, please also remember to rate, review, and subscribe. That's this week's episode of Sink or Swim. Don't forget to join us next time for another jam-packed episode. Thanks for listening.